On this edition of Native Report, we attend the National Congress of American Indians Annual Conference and Marketplace.
While at the conference, we learn how the National Indian Child Welfare Association helps Native nations.
And we interview Native American Rights Fund Executive Director John Echohawk. We also learn what we can do to lead healthier lives and hear from our elders on this edition of Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Blandin Foundation, and the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Ernie Stevens.
And I'm Rita Aspinwall. The National Congress of American Indians, founded in 1944, is the oldest, largest, and most representative American Indian and Alaska Native organization. Native Report interviewed outgoing NCAI President Brian Cladoosby about the organization, what issues are at the forefront for tribes, and his thoughts about his tenure as president.
The National Congress of American Indians turned Milwaukee, Wisconsin into the epicenter of Indian country for its 74th annual convention and marketplace. Nearly 2,000 members, including tribal leaders, tribal personnel, and other representatives, attended the convention to discuss the pressing issues faced by tribal communities.
We have 567 federally recognized tribes in the United States of America, plus state-recognized tribes. And even though we are 567 distinct sovereign nations, we come together at a time like this because so many issues transcend Indian country, whether it is dealing with, and what we'll be talking about here this week is Indian Health Service, Indian child welfare, broadband and access to internet, drug and alcohol abuse, the opioid issue, FEDA trust, and the budgets. We have many issues that we are dealing with collectively to try to make our communities a better place for our people. 74 years ago, our elders had a dream that the tribal leaders would come together at a time like this. We're stronger as one, a collective voice, talking the same message points, the same talking points. And sometimes there are issues that separate tribes, but I think overall the issues that bind us together are what hold us together, whether it be healthcare, whether it be economic development, whether it be housing, whether it be taxation issues, broadband. Those things are very important to our people going forward.
Wisconsin Representative Gwen Moore welcomed attendees and Congressional Native American Caucus co-chair Minnesota Congresswoman Betty McCollum expressed her commitment to tribal leaders considering the state of affairs with the current administration.
But Republicans and Democrats, who know Indian country best, stood together to defeat the funding that the Trump administration proposed. Quite frankly, we rejected the entire budget and the way it would affect Indian country. But that success would not have happened without thanks to the united advocacy with tribal leaders and the relationships that you have built with members of Congress over the years. It would not have happened without you walking the halls of Congress. I cannot thank you enough. Ken and I thank you. We were able to turn that around.
We are still yet to have key people in positions at Indian Health Service, key people in positions at Interior that deal with a lot of our issues. So from the standpoint of having bodies at desks dealing with our issues, they're a little behind. By this time in the last two administrations, in the Obama administration and the Bush administration, they had these key people in place working with us already. So we're a little behind with this administration, and as far as legislatively, there really hasn't been a lot that has gone on, but we're watching it very closely on the executive orders and the things like that that might negatively impact Indian country. NCAI has been in constant contact with the administration and their people. So we've been working with the White House liaison who deals with the Native American issues, and we've been working with the people at Interior that are in place now. One thing that maybe non-Indians don't know is that in the last 4 years, some of our bills that passed out of the House and the Senate and the President Obama signed were 100% supported by Republican and Democrat. So that's true bipartisanship. We like to think that our tribal issues are nonpartisan, and for the whole part, they are seen that way, and that we've got great friends on both sides of the aisle that help us.
As the outgoing president of NCAI, President Cladoosby offered some advice to the youth across Indian country.
NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians, is the largest and oldest intertribal organization in the nation, and it comes together 3 times a year, and we give leadership a chance to come and meet with the White House officials, the Interior officials, and congressional officials throughout the year. And so our work is advocacy. To our Native youth, very, very, very important message to them is to help us destroy historical trauma. Many of our youth don't know what historical trauma is and the genesis of that, and how the policies of the federal government created some very tough situations for their grandparents, great-grandparents, and the boarding school experience was probably the biggest one, where there was a lot of physical, mental, emotional, and sexual abuse that occurred at these boarding schools, and unfortunately a lot of that came home to our reservations, where we had to experience a lot of that, and our elders suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder because of that experience, and the drug they turned to help them cope was alcohol. And so we became a generation of alcoholics, another generation of alcoholics, and so I would hope that these kids would start to understand what historical trauma is, how it impacts them, and that they'd want to be that generation to break the cycle. So that would be my message to the youth.
Plantar fasciitis is heel pain and is a common problem that affects people between 40 to 60 years old who are overweight or obese. It can also affect about 10% of runners. There are no laboratory tests to help diagnose this, and x-rays usually are not helpful. Oftentimes people assume these are heel spurs, but these are only found in 39 to 50% of cases and are not diagnostic. Plantar fasciitis can be acute or chronic, and the pain is in the heel, just in front of the calcaneus or heel bone. This is classically worse with the first steps in the morning or when getting up from resting for a while, and the pain typically gets better after a few steps, but is not uncommon for it to get worse by the end of the day. It usually happens in one foot, but in about 30% of people it can be in both feet. Plantar fasciitis is a very common cause of foot pain and accounts for 11 to 15% of all foot complaints that require treatment. There's usually no trauma or injury that causes it, but walking on hard surfaces or having shoes with flat arches can precipitate it. People with flat feet or high arches are more prone to this. Plantar fasciitis occurs in about 10% of people who run regularly. This is not a gender-specific problem and happens to both men and women. Rest is one of the treatments that has been found to be helpful. Stopping the activity that caused it and avoidance of aggravating factors such as prolonged walking or standing on concrete floors can be very helpful. Stretching the Achilles tendon and plantar fascia first thing in the morning or after a period of rest may help limit some of the inflammation. The most helpful stretches are calf stretches, Achilles stretches, and plantar stretches. These stretches should be done 3 times daily with 10 repetitions of each stretch. There are taping techniques called low-dye taping, and this decreases stress on the plantar fascia. The tape is usually placed for a 3 to 7 day period, and this is followed by moving to a longer lasting arch support. Shock absorbing insoles, as well as custom orthotics, can increase function and decrease pain, and studies have shown them to be about equal. Night splints are helpful for both acute and chronic plantar fasciitis, but they may interfere with sleep comfort and be difficult to wear. 2 to 4 weeks of a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used in conjunction with other treatments is often helpful, but these medicines should not be taken long term. If all those measures are not helpful, a corticosteroid injection is often indicated. This is usually injected along with an anesthetic for pain relief and to determine if the injection is in the right place. Steroid injections are not totally benign, and complications are uncommon but can include infection, thinning of fat under the skin pigment changes, rupture of the tendon, and muscle or nerve damage. Physical therapy has much to offer, and they have multiple treatments including ultrasound, deep tissue massage, stretching, icing, and other treatments. Shockwave therapy is another treatment, and it is thought it creates local tissue injury that affects the nerves that sense pain and stimulates tissue growth factors involved in healing. Surgery is the final option when nothing else works over 6 to 12 months. About 75% of patients will get better, but recovery time can be slow, and up to 25% of patients can still have pain 2 years later. As always, prevention is the best treatment, and weight loss is foremost. Remember to call an elder. They've been waiting for your call. I'm Dr. Arnie Vainio, and this is Health Matters.
Ensuring the safety of Native children and helping strengthen their families are the central goals of all tribal child welfare programs. A presentation at NCAI by the National Indian Child Welfare Association provided information and governing strategies for tribal leaders and senior tribal program directors.
The National Congress of American Indians Annual Convention is an opportunity for the tribal leaders, personnel, and others to engage in dialogue about the most pressing issues facing tribal communities. They do so by holding breakout sessions. One such session attended by several tribal leaders dealt with the National Indian Child Welfare Association and what it can do for Native nations across Indian country.
National Indian Child Welfare Association is an association comprised of different people throughout Indian country. It started as the Northwest Indian Child Welfare Association. Eventually became national because there were no concerns or issues were for national levels. A lot of people don't know and understand the Indian Child Welfare Act and its purpose that was established for. And then there are other agencies and entities that are or don't want ICWA. So because some agencies feel that it's something that's not necessary. The presentation that we made is basically the presentation we do towards tribal leaders' advocacy role, educating them to support our initiative. And there are a lot of tribal leaders that are supportive and are aware of the situations in their own communities. And so they're really supportive of our efforts here in Indian Child Welfare.
At NCAI, we have a policy advocacy function that is kind of the foundation of a lot of what we do at the organization. Our belief is that we want to make sure that there's the best possible services and policies to support those services for all Native children wherever they're at, on tribes or within state systems. And so our policy function through the Government Affairs Department is to focus on tribal governance, helping tribes be able to strengthen and govern their programs in the way that makes best sense. Also to focus on the interrelationships between tribes and state governments, and to help make sure that those relationships operate smoothly and reflect things like the Indian Child Welfare Act requirements and then the cultural needs of Native children and families. And our third function is really on the federal level, talking about how we're going to advocate and empower other people through coalition building to advocate for better funding and for better policies to support Native children and families and their tribal programs.
The Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted to set standards for the placement of Native children in foster and adoptive homes to prevent the breakup of Native families.
So what the National Indian Child Welfare Association has done is that we, through the work with tribes, have collected the stories, the examples of how tribes are building these really successful, effective programs to help rehabilitate families, strengthen them, and be able to protect children in a way that many tribes can't get without having information from their own communities. And we treat the community as a core partner. We don't see it as it's just about the expertise of a certain program or some consultant. It's really about what the community, the answers for what is best for Native children come from Indian communities.
For us on our tribe, it's a problem that we see is growing. And with the new laws and things that are coming out, I think we need to be updated and kept up to speed on it. For us, I know it's what I've learned from this program, how important it is to keep on top of the policies and procedures and how our staff is to work with those, because a lot of times it can be a block that they stumble over if they don't have the right policies and procedures in place to help our people. And I think in Indian country, this is one of the biggest issues I think that we face when it comes to our families, you know, that have to deal with the drugs, the alcohols, or whatever, mental illness, whatever happens, and how these children get taken away from the home, and how we need to reunite them and keep in touch with them so they don't lose their identity and their culture. As a tribal leader, we need to learn the new issues that are going on in this area.
It's the challenge, not the tribes implementing it itself, but the states implementing it because they're not following the rules and regulations that are in place to follow Indian Child Welfare Act. On the other hand, the challenge for tribes is funding. They don't get enough funding or adequate funding from the federal government to make sure that their programs are running in an efficient way. And if we get funded cut more, then we're going to hurt more in our organization. But I think that's why NCAI is here to support some of the issues that are out there that we're pursuing to make sure that these cuts don't occur.
There are other challenges that exist for agencies, such as NCAI, that desires to assist tribes in their quest to uphold ICWA.
What we're trying to do is to try and reach out to all the different groups that have a role in any community. So we're working with community advocates, we're working with tribal leaders, we're working with tribal social workers and administrators, court judges, all of those different people wherever they happen to be. So we're in many ways respects the translators of bringing in information, making sure that it's appropriate to those communities and those professionals, and making sure that it's disseminated well. The good news, though, is that on the federal level, we're seeing federal child welfare policy for all children and families moving closer and closer all the time towards what is the Indian child welfare standards that have been there since 1978.
What I learned today, I want to go back and talk it over with my tribal council and let them know what's going on, and also with the staff and how important it is to have supervision over them and for them to learn our native ways and our culture, to help teach that to the children who have left the reservation and to keep track of them. Instead of monthly visits, maybe they should be visiting once or twice in the home to make sure they're doing well. And to give them the tools they need to do their job, I think is very important. And I think that's why having policies and procedures, checks and balance is important to have a smooth running operation when it comes to family services. I hope that any tribal people out there, families or whatever, if you have enough room or a big heart to join in and be a foster family home.
Even today, when I look around in our native traditions, we're losing so much, and we've lost so much already. So what is a veteran's role? Well, when I grew up, yeah, we looked to those veterans then, but the kids don't do that nowadays, and maybe because we don't stand up and tell them either. You know, our traditions are oral. Now they read them on a book or on a cell phone. If it's not on there, then it mustn't be true. You know, and I've questioned a lot of them saying, you know, why don't you stand for honorings? We don't stand. Yeah, we did when we were kids. I remember everybody did. And that was the benefit of Chicago, that you had all these tribes there, and that's where I learned a lot. Chippewa, Ojibwe, Navajo, Hopi, all these tribes. Oh, just general, not everything. but just general. And all those tribes, they all stood for honoring, because that was an honor.
Since 1971, the Native American Rights Fund has provided legal assistance to Indian tribes, organizations, and individuals nationwide who might otherwise have gone without adequate representation. Native Report sat down with founder and executive director John Echohawk to learn more about the organization.
Nearly all of the matters discussed at the National Congress of American Indians annual convention are of a legal nature, and for John Echohawk, the founder and executive director of the Native American Rights Fund, the convention can be a busy time. John was the very first graduate from the University of New Mexico's law school program to train Native American lawyers.
I started to law school in the 1960s. I wanted to be a lawyer and didn't have any idea what I would do as a lawyer, and I was in the right place at the right time. I went to the University of New Mexico Law School under a special scholarship program that the federal government was starting in 1967, and they thought they ought to try to teach us something relevant, so they did some research on the treaties and Indian law and put together one of the first courses on federal Indian law that was ever taught in law schools across the country. And basically what it boiled down to is our tribes had a lot of legal rights under the treaties and the laws, and so we wondered, well, how come this isn't happening back home on the reservations? And then we learned about the legal process, and that is basically, unless you have a lawyer, it doesn't matter what's on paper, what's written, you don't have any rights. You have to be able to enforce them using lawyers. Lawyers cost money. Our people were the poorest of the poor. We didn't have any money for lawyers, and at the same time in the 60s, going on around us was the civil rights movement. A lot of poor African Americans taking cases to court and getting their equal rights enforced, civil rights, and they were represented by lawyers from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the American Civil Liberties Union, and these were nonprofit organizations that raised money and hired lawyers and then made them available to represent these people for free. So we said, that's what we need to do.
Upon graduating from law school, John, along with several tribal leaders and lawyers, organized the Native American Rights Fund.
We decided what the most important cases that we ought to undertake were, and started and really spawned a litigation revolution across Indian country as they started to see how we could use these laws and the litigation process to advance our rights, and it changed everything. Treaties are the supreme law of the land. Didn't matter if people didn't like it, that was the law. We wanted our self-determination or our treaty rights, and that's the law. That's what the federal judges started saying. Yes, these rights are still alive, and we have rights to self-determination, self-government, and everything's promised in the treaties, and it didn't matter if it might have been politically unpopular some places, that was the law.
This was embraced by Congress and the administration at the time. It was the start of the self-determination era. One of the first cases NARF undertook is that of the Northwest tribes who wished to practice their fishing rights guaranteed through treaty.
The treaties basically said that they had the right to fish in common with the citizens of the state at their usual and accustomed places. Well, the state of Washington had interpreted that to mean you got to get a fishing license under state law, and that doesn't mean anything special. In the legal proceedings, we were able to have our Native leaders explain what their understanding of that language was, and the understanding of their ancestors, and that was that they basically started owning the whole resource, and that language meant that they were going to share that resource with the non-Indians that came in. So it was a 50-50 arrangement, and so that's what the courts ruled. So kind of took off from there, across the country and even up this way. Fishing rights issues on the Great Lakes, for the Michigan tribes, we work with them. Over here in Wisconsin, same thing.
Based in Boulder, Colorado, the organization has 35 employees, of which 17 are lawyers. They also have satellite offices in Washington, D.C. and Anchorage, Alaska.
Requests for assistance are always coming in every day, and there's no way that we can help everybody, so we have a system of priorities for taking new cases that's been set by the board that just makes us focus on the most important cases that are going to have the biggest impact, that we have the best chance of winning. And we've done that very well over 47 years, and have been involved in most of the major Indian rights litigation cases and a lot of the legislation. We can't do much lobbying as a nonprofit, but we have been involved in some of the major Indian laws that have passed in Congress. It's always a constant process of educating people about these issues. Apparently, we've got some people in the new administration not fully informed either. You know, it all changes with different administrations, and we just roll with the changes and do the best we can and keep educating people, keep working. And overall, our social and economic conditions have improved over the years. We've still got a ways to go, but it's what we want to do, where we want to go, and we just need to keep at it.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org and on Facebook.
Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors across Indian Country. I'm Rita Aspinwall.
And I'm Ernie Stevens. Join us next time for Native Report.
Rita Aspinwall is an enrolled member of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and is an ICWA social worker with Fond du Lac Social Services. Ernie Stevens is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and is a film and television producer. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Blandin Foundation, and the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.